It's such an honor to be here to speak to so many people who are so passionate about education in our country. And, as I was coming to speak or getting myself together, I was thinking of what could I say to an audience that already knows so much. But there's one thing that I can always bring as a teacher, and that is stories to hopefully inspire and get people motivated and ready to change the educational landscape. So as I was doing that, I was at a coffee shop on Sunday, and I was finalizing my notes for the speech, and I kept getting interrupted. And this happens as a teacher because you run into former students all the time. So on Sunday, I ran into a former student who asked me to be in her TikTok video, which I'm not sure if you know what that is, but it's the new trend in the app. So on Sunday, I actually was in my first TikTok video, and I was pretty excited about it. But more importantly, I was also interrupted by someone else. And it was a former student of my mother's. Her name was Emily. And Emily recognized me, and she asked if I was Miss Dier's son. And I said, yes, that's my mom. And you see, my mom has been teaching for 45 years. She's still teaching to this day. In fact, I asked if she wanted to come here and maybe be recognized or watch me speak, but she said, no, I'm teaching. I can't miss teaching. So I said, fair enough. That's why, she really is the greatest teacher. Emily went on to tell me how amazing my mom was and how she influenced her to be where she is today. Emily is getting her master's at Tulane in microbiology. And that might not seem like such a big deal in front of an audience who has a lot of letters behind their names or a lot of degrees, but where I'm from in St. Bernard Parish, it is a huge deal. Only 10% of St. Bernard Parish has a bachelor's degree. That's less than the state average of 24%. And only 1% has a master's degree. So to hear somebody say that my mom influenced her to break barriers and glass ceilings to get where she was really influential. And after she told me about my mother, I always ask the same question that I always do when people talk to me about my mom. I say, what made her such an inspiration to you? What was the reason how did she make you feel this way to get to where you were? And Emily responded with this, quote, literally, was her quote. Any teacher that you have that is passionate is inspiring to young people. So I went back and erased my intro to this speech and I put that quote up there because I said that's what I wanted to talk about is inspiring people to become better people in terms of advancing their education or their careers or just themselves and molding their identity. And that's what my mom does consistently. And they always remember how she made them feel. They never say things like, oh, she made me memorize the Declaration of Independence, or she told me the causes of the American Revolution, or she met this one standard that was on an IEP, or nothing like that. It's always how she made them feel. And I try to carry that wherever I go. Because I was raised by a passionate teacher, and everywhere I went, people constantly stopped my mom, and they thanked her, and they praised her, and they told her, you're the reason why this happened or that happened. And it was really inspirational to see. And that's what I think every accreditation program should focus on. How do we get teachers to inspire their students? I actually thought all those interactions were normal, by the way, and that's just how it was. You were going to the grocery store and people would interrupt you and stop you and thank you or thank my mother, until I realized that, nope, that's just because I was the son of an educator, and not everyone's life was like that. In fact, I was just talking to someone who was also the son of an educator, and they know exactly what it's like growing up in a town where your mom is so influential. So there were a lot of interactions that I grew up hearing, but there was one that stuck out to me. A man by the name of Max, pictured here, stopped my mother at a grocery store about 10 years ago and started crying. So I thought that was unusual. And he thanked my mother for everything that she did for him. And then he turned and told me the story about my mother. You see, Max was one of the first openly gay students at Chalmette High School, where I currently teach. And this was in the 80s, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, and it was a tough time for Max. He told me that there were no clubs, there were no resources, there was nothing for him, except for my mother. He said that my mother worked day in and day out to stop the constant bullying that he faced, and to make the school seem safer for him. He told me that my mom wrote him a pass for him to leave class 2 minutes early so he would not face the bullying in the hallway. And he told me that every teacher in the school respected that past because they respected my mother. Max told me that the reason he is still here today is because he had a teacher who really cared and inspired him. And I thought that was really inspirational, and I asked if I could share his story, and he says yes, and he'll tell it to anyone who wants to listen. So now, I kid you not, my mom actually gets her hair cut from Max at a very discounted rate. And I think that she does an incredible job with her hair. So despite hearing these stories, despite being raised by a teacher, I actually did not want to become a teacher, and I'm going to emphasize that. It was the last thing I wanted to do was to become a teacher, because I saw how hard my mom worked. I remember her cooking and holding a pot in one hand or a pan in one hand and doing lesson plans or grading with the other. I remember her going to students' homes to tutor if they couldn't make it to school. I remember going with her to hospitals if kids were sick and they couldn't make it or whatever. I just remember her doing so much and going above and beyond to the point where she didn't separate her teaching life with her own life. It was just a part of her identity. But that's something that I didn't think I was up to the task. I didn't realize that she was just an extraordinary teacher. So I actually did not want to become a teacher. But fate had other goals, and I'll tell you a little bit how I became a teacher. It kind of starts off in a dark place, but I think you need to know it now that you're in New Orleans. So as you know, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit southeast Louisiana, completely devastated St. Bernard Parish, where I'm from. I was a senior in high school, and we had to move to Texas. We stayed in a hotel in Texas until we didn't have any more money, because back then it was paper checks. It wasn't digital. So we had to move to a shelter. And it was at that shelter where I was feeling kind of low. You know, I was a senior in high school. It was supposed to be a good year, but unfortunately, we were in a shelter, and we still had to enroll in school. So I enrolled in a school in Texas, and I didn't have anything but the clothes on my back. However, I do remember the inspirational teachers that I met in Texas. They welcomed me in, they helped me cope through the trauma of Katrina and temporary homelessness, and they really made it a special place for me. But I remember one teacher in particular, and it was a coach. And I want to emphasize that I was a coach, because I'm also a coach, and I think sometimes coaches, we get bad reps. But we do things as well. I wanted to try out for the soccer team, but I didn't have any cleats. I didn't have any soccer gear. I didn't have anything. So when Coach Probst heard about this, one day he came to school and he gave me a box. So I thought that was okay. And then he walked off. He didn't expect a thank you or anything. He just handed it to me and he left. So I opened up this box, and what I saw were brand new Nike soccer cleats, which I couldn't even afford before Katrina. And so I was so happy. And I had soccer gear, the best of the best. So that day, I put on all that soccer gear, and it fit perfectly. I went and tried out, and I made the soccer team. So I was super excited. A couple of weeks later, colleges started to recruit people, and I was recruited to play at East Texas Baptist University, which was a big deal for me because when I was applying for colleges at that time, I didn't have any physical transcripts. There were no cloud systems back then. I just had to tell the colleges my word that I got an A in this class and that class. And, you know, when you have hundreds of thousands of students doing that because of Katrina, it got really messy. But that avenue opened for me because I had one teacher that just made a tiny gesture. You might not even remember it, but he opened up so many doors. So even with that in mind, I still didn't want to be a teacher. Even though my mother was a teacher, even though the teachers helped me through my most trying times, I was like, nope, not for me. But again, fate had other goals. I was a senior in college, and I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was taking constitutional law classes, and I was getting really into it. But I realized something was missing in all of those classes. So I called my mom, and I complained, like I frequently do, and she listened, like she frequently does, because she's a teacher, and that's what they do. And she said, why don't you come watch me teach and see it from my perspective, just so you can get an idea of what teaching is like from the other aisle. Well, I didn't want to do that because I was a student, and many people think that they know what it's like to be a teacher because they are students and they watch teachers, but that is not the case. And also, I can't tell my mom no, or she will hound me on things. So 2 weeks later, I drove home and I went to watch my mom teach. And I remember sitting in her desk and being amazed by what I saw. Students were engaged, they were collaborating, they were inspired, they were raising their hand, and they just loved being in her class, and she was inspiring so many people. So I said, wow, that's what I was missing, was that human connection that I felt in that classroom. So that's when I answered the calling to be a teacher. And also at the same time, in 2010, the BP oil spill hit St. Bernard Parish. So I thought if there was any community that needed people to go back and try to revitalize it or help it, it was St. Bernard Parish. So after I graduated college, I moved back to my hometown and became a teacher. And I've never looked back. Now, I didn't have a teaching degree or certification or anything like that, so I enrolled in the University of New Orleans. And what I did was I tried to learn everything there was. I read all the books, I watched the lectures and whatnot. But my first year, I was not a good teacher. I felt like maybe I misread that calling. But all first-year teachers feel that way, and that's something I had to learn as well. So I went to UNO and got a Master's of Arts in Teaching, and that also inspired me. I had a professor there named Dr. Stephen Corbett, who is a principal at a school here. He had a class called Multicultural Education, and what he did was use our culture in the classroom to inspire us and whatnot. So I remember being inspired there. So what I did was I went and got another master's degree, and then I kept trying to get more professional development. I went to different programs that was mentioned earlier, and each one of them had a similar theme. There was a similar theme woven in each one of them, and it was that the most impactful teachers are those who can inspire and make students feel validated. And that's something that I try to do each and every day. That's what stuck out to me from watching my mom teach, from watching Dr. Corbett teach, and from every program. So when teachers inspire, real connections are made. And when real connections are made, that is when true empowerment happens. And empowerment provides the willpower to overcome adversity, and adversity provides the willpower to be more resilient. So in my opinion, the hallmark of a true accreditation program is one that teaches teachers how to empower students to do things on their own. So we are not as needed as much, and students can accomplish their goals and their dreams. This is my student, Jayla, and this is us eating king cake, which, since you're in New Orleans, you should try king cake. It might not be the exact season right now, but I think it can be an exception because it's absolutely delicious. Jayla said she gained a strong sense of connection and empowerment from my classroom, and she wanted to go out and do more after she was finished with my class. Jayla wanted to start a club designed to destigmatize mental health issues and coping through trauma with her peers. And she had a goal, she had a vision, and she asked me to sponsor it, and I was very honored to sponsor this new club that Jayla wanted to start. Jayla went out and found an organization in California that would provide the funding, they would provide the training, they would provide the activities and everything for her. Unfortunately, that organization didn't reach out to, or didn't respond to Jayla's request. They didn't respond to her emails and tweets and letters. So Jayla was upset. She had a goal and a vision, but she was facing an obstacle. And as a teacher, that happens frequently. Our students face obstacles. And as a teacher, we always try to be the hero and help our students overcome those obstacles. So unbeknownst to Jayla, I reached out to that organization, thinking that maybe if I sent a bio or something about myself, they would respond, but they didn't as well. So I was feeling, okay, I'm not sure where to go from here. But Jayla was inspired, and she was already empowered, and she had other ideas. One day in October, she came into my classroom, and she wrote the word blue vertically on my board. And I said, okay, Jayla, I'm colorblind, but I like the color blue. That's one color I can see. And she said, Mr. Dier, can you stop being witty for 1 second and just hear my plan? So I decided to hear her out. And then she wrote these words right next to it. Believe in yourself, love yourself, unite, and evolve to empower. And she said, we're going to call it Club Blue and do it ourselves. And so I was inspired by this. A student that I felt like I inspired is now, in turn, inspiring me. So after receiving permission from the principal, who is the longest-serving principal in the country, by the way, she made signs and put them all around the school for the first meeting. And I remember she asked me, Mr. Dier, how many people do you think are going to come to the first meeting? And I didn't want to let Jayla down because I couldn't imagine too many students not going to lunch, but going to a classroom instead to talk about trauma and mental health issues and managing anxiety and things of that nature. So I told Jayla a high number. I said probably about a dozen or so, maybe even 15. And she said, really? I think more people are going to come. I said, I hope that you are right and that I am wrong. Well, Jayla was very right and I was very wrong. This is a photo of the first Club Blue meeting. It was, all 32 of my desks were full, and there was a line outside of my door. Over 50 students signed up. And I was incredibly inspired by this. And they made the activities and did things themselves. During these first few meetings, they built upon their existing commonalities and experiences to make a shared connection. The same thing that my mom did in her classroom, and the same thing that I tried to do in my classroom. You see, these students are dubbed Katrina babies. Like me, they spent much of their time in shelters across the country and, facing a lot of issues and adversity. But the only difference is that I could at least manage this as a young adult. They were merely babies when all of that chaos happened. And that trauma is intense for young people because, as many of you know, the majority of brain development happens before a child even reaches the age of 5. So these students are survivors of trauma, and they're navigating their own way and making their own way. And I was so impressed by the conversations and discussions and activities they came up with. They held seminars on managing body dysmorphia in the digital age, something that many of us didn't have to deal with in high school. They held discussions on managing the school-to-prison pipeline, which is an issue all around our country. They wrote letters to loved ones, some of whom are deceased, and bravely read them out loud. So they were moving mountains and they were incredibly inspirational. So now I sit in their circles as well, and I talk with them, and I try to cope through my own trauma and anxiety, and now other teachers visit, and guest speakers, and cultural leaders. So it really morphed into something incredible. Just last week, I spoke at an Educators Rising conference in Louisiana, in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and told them some of Jayla's story. And I didn't know this, but a lot of students wanted to have something like that at their school. So students came up to me and they asked how they can start a Club Blue. So all I did was give them Jayla's email, and now students want to start a Club Blue at their school across the state. So a student that I felt that I empowered and inspired is now not just inspiring me, but now she's inspiring students across the state of Louisiana. And I think every accreditation program should focus on how can we manage and how can we get teachers prepared to inspire. Because when you inspire students, that's when true empowerment happens. The more accreditation programs focus on providing teachers with the tools to inspire, the more we empower students to go on and take on the world themselves. For the best example of this, look no further than my home community of St. Bernard Parish, which is 10 minutes down St. Claude, not too far from here. The majority of St. Bernard Parish lives well below the poverty line in what many people call Cancer Alley because of all the refineries lining the Mississippi River. The community has undergone centuries of slavery, racialized massacres, some of the deadliest floods in our country's history. It is home to ground zero of the country's opioid epidemic. There's even a Netflix show about it called The Pharmacist. And it was hit by the largest oil spill in world history. And now we face the persistent threat of climate change on our vanishing coastline. So it seems like things aren't going so well there. However, despite these generational legacies of trauma and these ongoing threats, a lot of students and teachers have come together to create that culture of empowerment and resilience. Just last semester, not only did my students start Club Blue to help cope with trauma, but they organized cypress tree planting in our marshes to help fight back against climate change and revitalize our coastline. In our class, students now embrace their diverse cultures, and we give them space to share things that make them unique. Because what better gift can we give than the gifts that make up the essence of who we are? Now, students hold jazz funerals and second lines to keep these cultural culturally old traditions alive. And I see some of you are from New Orleans because I'm getting some head nods when I talk about things like this, which is awesome. They also organized our school's first field trip to the country's first plantation dedicated to the lives of the enslaved, not the slave owners. They appeared on the front page of the New York Times for their ability to manage complex civic issues in a world of increasingly hyperpolarization. They're doing things that adults, we need to learn how to do. And this sense of community is happening in a school where roughly 80% of students are on free and reduced lunch, where no race or ethnicity is a majority, a school that's more diverse than our country today, and a country of increasing segregation, a school that is reflective of the future demographics of our country, the one our students will inherit from us. Because for some communities, like our community, inspiring students in ways that influence a school culture of empowerment and resilience is our only option. And here are some photos of me and my lovely students. I really enjoy them. But all of these positive stories derive from accreditation programs that prepare teachers to inspire students. That's where it all starts, with programs on how to inspire teachers. So as you discuss how to prepare teachers for the most challenging job, but most important job in the world, always keep that in mind and remember the importance of creating space for teachers to become inspirational. Because standards and data and all of these things and technology, all of that is important, but we should never lose sight of the why we get into education. We should remember that students will always remember how we made them feel when they get into the classroom. They might not remember everything we taught them, but they will remember how they felt once they left our classroom. And true change only occurs through inspiration. We need to inspire students the way that my mom inspired Max, or the way that I inspired Jayla, because they will in turn inspire us and go out and inspire communities as well. We need to make students feel the way that Coach Probst made me feel when he gave me those soccer cleats when I had nothing. And we need to make people feel the way Emily felt when she was in my mom's classroom. Because change in our country only starts with teachers who can inspire, because they are in a unique position to put students at the forefront of their education to truly impact communities. So I'll close with the quote that I started with. As Emily told me on Monday, any teacher that you have that is passionate is inspiring to young people. So as you start off this conference, ensure that we're providing teachers the tools to inspire, and that should be at the heart of any accreditation discussion. Thank you all so much. Enjoy New Orleans and eat a lot of food.